In 1894, the Harrington estate was drowning in debt, and Lord Harrington had only one asset left to sell: his breathtakingly beautiful daughter, Beatrix. He invited the most ruthless man in England, the Duke of Caldwell, to dinner, certain that the Duke would pay a fortune for her hand. But the Duke didn't look at the diamond in the display case. He looked at the dust in the corner. When the moment came, and the father offered the beauty, the Duke turned, pointed a gloved finger at the girl scrubbing the floor in the shadows, and said 4 words that destroyed the family's entire plan. "I'll take that one." This isn't a fairy tale. This is a story of revenge, dark secrets, and a love born from the ashes of betrayal. The rain in Yorkshire didn't wash things clean. It just made the mud deeper. Inside the crumbling walls of Harrington Manor, the mood was as dreary as the weather. The estate, once the jewel of the county, was rotting from the inside out, much like the soul of its master, Lord Percival Harrington. Percival stood by the fireplace in the drawing-room, swirling a glass of cheap brandy that he had decanted into a crystal bottle to hide its origin. He stared at his eldest daughter, Beatrix. She was, objectively, a masterpiece. Golden hair that caught the candlelight, skin like porcelain, and eyes the colour of summer cornflowers. She sat on the velvet settee, practicing her needlepoint, though she barely knew how to thread a needle. "He arrives in an hour," Percival muttered, his voice tight with a mixture of fear and greed. "You know what is at stake, Beatrix." Beatrix didn't look up. "I know, Father. The creditors are circling like vultures. If I don't secure the Duke, we lose the manor." She said it without emotion, her voice practiced and melodic. She had been raised for this single purpose: to be sold to the highest bidder. "Not just the manor," Percival hissed, stepping closer. "My reputation, my freedom. If Duke Tristan Caldwell doesn't sign the marriage contract tonight, I go to debtor's prison, and you will be on the streets." "I won't fail," Beatrix said, finally looking up with a cold, calculating smile. "I am the most beautiful woman in Yorkshire. Duke Caldwell is a man. Men are simple." In the corner of the room, hidden by the shadows of a heavy oak bookcase, a slight figure moved silently. Genevieve, the younger daughter, was on her knees, polishing the skirting boards. She wore a grey woolen dress that was 3 sizes too big, a hand-me-down from a maid who had been dismissed 2 years ago. Her hair, a dark, rich chestnut, was hidden under a severe cap, and her face was smudged with soot from the fireplace she had just cleaned. Genevieve was the mistake. Born to Percival's second wife, a woman of no fortune who had died in childbirth, Genevieve had been blamed for every misfortune that befell the Harringtons since. She wasn't ugly. In fact, her features were striking, with high cheekbones and eyes the colour of storm clouds. But she was invisible. Her father had decreed long ago that she was to earn her keep as a servant in her own home, saving him the cost of a maid. "You!" Percival barked, noticing the movement in the corner. "Genevieve, get out! The Duke cannot see! Clutter!" Genevieve stood up, keeping her head lowered. "Yes, father." "And make sure dinner is perfect," Beatrix added, not looking at her sister. "The soup was lukewarm yesterday. If you embarrass me tonight, I'll have father lock you in the cellar again." "I will check the kitchen myself," Genevieve whispered, her voice a soft rasp from lack of use. She hurried out of the drawing-room, her heart pounding against her ribs. She knew who Duke Tristan Caldwell was. Everyone did. He was known as the Iron Duke. He had made his fortune not just from inheritance, but from ruthless investments in railways and steel. Rumours swirled that he had killed a man in a duel in France, that his first fiancée had vanished under mysterious circumstances, and that he had a heart made of coal, Genevieve reached the kitchen, where the cook, Mrs. Higgins, the only person who treated her with kindness, was frantically chopping carrots. "Is he here?" Mrs. Higgins asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "Not yet," Genevieve said, grabbing a heavy tray of silver. "Father is terrified. Beatrix is confident." Mrs. Higgins snorted. "Beatrix is a fool in a silk dress. The Duke eats men like Percival for breakfast. I worry for you, child. Stay out of sight." "I intend to," Genevieve said, picking up the silver polish. "I have no desire to be noticed by a monster." But fate, cruel and unpredictable, had other plans. The carriage that pulled up the gravel drive was black, devoid of crests or ostentation. It looked less like a vehicle of aristocracy, and more like a hearse. When the footman opened the door, Tristan Caldwell stepped out. He was a giant of a man, standing well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that strained against his dark, tailored coat. He didn't wear a hat, allowing the rain to dampen his raven-black hair. His face was hard, defined by a sharp jawline and a nose that had been broken once, likely in a fight, not a fall. But it was his eyes that froze the blood. They were grey, intelligent, and utterly devoid of warmth. Percival Harrington rushed to the door, bowing so low he nearly toppled over. "Your Grace, welcome to Harrington Manor. We are honoured, truly honoured." Tristan looked at the bowing man with open disdain. He didn't offer his hand. "Lord Harrington, let us skip the pleasantries. I am here because you owe my bank £40,000. You claim to have a solution." Percival swallowed hard, sweat beading on his forehead, despite the cold draught in the hall. Yes. A solution of the utmost value. Please come in. Dry yourself by the fire." Tristan walked in, stripping off his wet gloves and handing them to the terrified butler. He scanned the hallway, noting the peeling wallpaper and the faded rug. He knew Harrington was desperate. He despised desperate men. They were unpredictable and pathetic. Percival led him into the drawing room. Beatrix was posed perfectly by the piano now, the candlelight catching her profile just so. She turned, feigning surprise, and curtsied deeply. "Your Grace," she murmured, lowering her lashes. "I am Beatrix." Tristan stared at her. He walked closer, circling her like a man inspecting a horse at an auction. Beatrix held her breath, confident in her beauty. "You are very symmetric," Tristan said flatly. Beatrix blinked, unsure if it was a compliment. "Thank you, Your Grace." "Sit," Tristan commanded, taking the armchair by the fire. "Harrington, pour me a drink, and tell me why I shouldn't foreclose on this property tomorrow morning." Percival's hands shook as he poured the brandy. "Beatrix, Your Grace. She is widely considered the jewel of the county. She has been trained in music, French, and the art of hosting. She would make an exemplary duchess." Tristan took the glass, swirled it, and didn't drink. "You are selling your daughter to pay your debt?" "I am offering a union of families," Percival corrected quickly, smiling nervously. "A merger. Her beauty for your protection." Tristan looked at Beatrix again. She smiled, a practiced, dazzling expression that didn't reach her eyes. He had seen 1,000 women like her in London ballrooms, vain, empty, and hungry for his title. She bored him instantly. "Dinner is served," the butler announced, his voice trembling. They moved to the dining room. The table was set with the family's last remaining good china. Genevieve was not supposed to be there. She was supposed to be in the kitchen, plating the food. But the clumsy footman, hired only for the night, had dropped the soup tureen in the hallway just moments before. Panic had erupted in the kitchen. Mrs. Higgins had shoved a fresh tureen into Genevieve's hands. "Go, you have to serve it. Cover your face. Don't look at him. Just pour the soup." Genevieve, terrified, had entered the dining room through the service door. She moved silently, her head bowed, clutching the heavy ceramic bowl. She reached the Duke's side. "Soup, Your Grace," she whispered, her voice barely audible. As she leaned in to ladle the broth, her oversized sleeve caught on the edge of his wine glass. The crystal goblet tipped. Time seemed to slow down. Genevieve gasped and lunged, catching the glass mid-air just before it hit the table, but in doing so, the heavy tureen in her other hand tilted. Hot soup splashed onto the Duke's hand. "You clumsy idiot!" Percival shrieked, jumping up from his chair. "You stupid girl!" Beatrix gasped theatrically. "Oh, how dreadful! Father, I told you she shouldn't be allowed out of the scullery." Genevieve froze, her face draining of blood. She set the tureen down and grabbed a napkin, instinctively reaching out to dab the Duke's hand. "I am so sorry, Your Grace. The sleeve, please forgive me." She looked up. For the first time, she looked directly at him. Tristan didn't pull his hand away. He didn't shout. He sat perfectly still, staring at the girl who was trembling beside him. He saw the soot on her cheek. He saw the oversized, ragged dress. He saw the red, raw hands of a worker. But mostly, he saw her eyes. They weren't predatory like Beatrix's. They weren't greedy like Percival's. They were terrified, yet there was a spark of defiance deep within them, a fire that refused to be extinguished by her circumstances. "What is your name?" Tristan asked. His voice was low, rumbling through the silent room. "Genevieve, Your Grace," she whispered. "She is nobody," Percival interrupted, rushing over to grab Genevieve by the arm. "She is a distant relation, a charity case we took in. She is simple in the head. Get out, girl. Get out before I—" "Release her," Tristan said. The command was soft, but it cracked like a whip. Percival dropped Genevieve's arm as if it burned him. Tristan slowly wiped the soup from his hand with the napkin Genevieve had offered. He stood up, towering over the table. He looked at Beatrix, who was pouting prettily, waiting for him to dismiss the servant. He looked at Percival, who was sweating profusely. Then he looked at Genevieve. She was bracing herself for a blow, her shoulders hunched. "Harrington," Tristan said, keeping his eyes on Genevieve. "You owe me £40,000. Yes, Your Grace. And as we discussed, Beatrix—" "I have no interest in Beatrix," Tristan said coldly. "She is a porcelain doll. Pretty to look at, empty inside. I have no use for ornaments." Beatrix's jaw dropped. Percival looked like he had been struck. "But, Your Grace, then— the debt?" "The debt can be cleared," Tristan said. He reached out and, with a single finger, tilted Genevieve's chin up, forcing her to look him in the eye. He saw the intelligence there. He saw the hardship. He saw a woman who knew the reality of the world, not a pampered child. "I need a wife who understands duty," Tristan said to the room, though his eyes never left Genevieve's. "I need a wife who knows what it is to work, to suffer, and to survive. I need a partner, not a parasite." He turned to Percival. "I will cancel your debt. I will give you an additional annual stipend to keep this rotting house standing. In exchange, I take her." Percival blinked, confused. "Take her? The servant?" "She is your daughter, is she not?" Tristan asked, noting the family resemblance despite the grime. Percival hesitated. Admitting she was his daughter meant admitting he treated his own flesh and blood like a slave. But the money, the debt. "Yes," Percival croaked. "She is my second daughter." "Then the deal is made," Tristan said. He looked back at Genevieve. "Go pack your things, Genevieve. You are leaving with me tonight." "Tonight?" Genevieve gasped. "But where?" "To Caldwell Hall," Tristan said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips for the first time. To be the Duchess of Caldwell. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the sound of Beatrix shattering her wine glass in a fit of rage. The journey to Caldwell Hall took 3 hours in the rain. Genevieve sat on the velvet bench of the carriage, pressing herself into the corner as far away from the Duke as possible. She was still wearing her servant's dress. She had no other clothes to pack. Her luggage consisted of a small burlap sack containing a hairbrush, a book of poetry she had stolen from the library years ago, and a locket that had belonged to her mother. Tristan sat opposite her, reading documents by the light of a small carriage lantern. He hadn't spoken a word since they left her father's house. "Why?" Genevieve finally whispered. The silence was suffocating her. Tristan didn't look up from his papers. "Why what?" "Why me?" She gestured to her ragged dress. She is everything a duke should want. I am a scullery maid in my own father's house. I smell of onions and soot. Are you mocking me? Is this a cruel joke?" Tristan finally lowered the papers. He looked at her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "Do you think I became the wealthiest man in England by doing what is expected, Genevieve?" "I don't know anything about you," she retorted, her fear momentarily giving way to frustration. "Except that you bought me like a cow at a market." "I bought your freedom," he corrected sharply. "Would you prefer to have stayed, to scrub floors until your knees gave out? To watch your sister marry a rich fool while you withered away in the attic?" Genevieve fell silent. He was right, and she hated it. "No, but I do not understand what you gain." "My life is complicated," Tristan said, looking out the window at the passing darkness. "I am surrounded by vipers, sycophants who want my money, politicians who want my influence, and women who want my title. If I married a woman like Beatrix, I would have to watch my back in my own bed. She is loyal only to her own vanity." He turned his gaze back to her. "But you have been hardened by fire. You know what it is to be invisible. You observe things others miss. I saw it in your eyes when you caught that glass. Quick reflexes, awareness. Fear, yes, but control. So you want a watchdog, not a wife," Genevieve said bitterly. "I want someone real," Tristan said softly. "And we will see if you are up to the task. But be warned, Genevieve. Harrington Manor was a purgatory of neglect. Caldwell Hall is a hell of intrigue. My family, they will not welcome you." The carriage slowed, turning through massive iron gates. In the distance, illuminated by lightning, stood Caldwell Hall. It was enormous, a Gothic fortress of stone that looked more like a prison than a home. "Welcome home, Duchess," Tristan said dryly. When the carriage stopped, the doors were opened by footmen in liveries far grander than anything Genevieve had ever seen. Tristan stepped out and offered his hand. For a moment, she hesitated. Then, she took it. His grip was warm and firm. They walked up the grand staircase to the entrance. The great oak doors swung open, revealing a cavernous entrance hall lined with servants. And standing at the center of the hall was an older woman with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun, leaning on a cane. She wore black silk and enough diamonds to feed a village for a year. "Mother," Tristan said, his voice tightening. "I have returned." The Dowager Duchess, Lady Catherine Caldwell, narrowed her eyes. She looked past Tristan to Genevieve. She took in the grey woolen dress, the soot smudge that Genevieve had failed to wipe off, and the terrified posture. "Tristan," Lady Catherine said, her voice like ice cracking. "Where is the Harrington girl?" "The beauty?" Percival assured me she was exquisite. "This is the Harrington girl," Tristan said, pulling Genevieve forward. "This is Genevieve, my betrothed." Lady Catherine stared for a long, agonizing moment. Then she threw her head back and laughed. It was a cruel, harsh sound. "This?" She pointed her cane at Genevieve. "You brought home a beggar? A chimney sweep? Have you lost your mind, boy? The society papers will eat us alive by morning." "Let them eat," Tristan said dismissively. "Mrs. Pringle, take Lady Genevieve to the blue suite. Draw her a bath. Burn these clothes." "Burn them," Genevieve whispered. "You are a Caldwell now," Tristan said, leaning down so only she could hear. "You will dress like one. You will act like one. And tomorrow you will learn how to fight like one. Because she," he nodded toward his mother, "is just the first enemy you will face." Genevieve watched him walk away toward his study, leaving her alone in the hall with the sneering Dowager Duchess and a staff that looked at her with a mixture of pity and contempt. She straightened her spine. Her father had broken her heart, but he hadn't broken her spirit. She had survived the cellar. She would survive the castle. "Show me the bath," Genevieve said to the housekeeper, her voice trembling but clear. "And burn the dress. I never want to see it again." The bath water was hot enough to scald, but for Genevieve, it felt like salvation. In the cavernous bathroom of the blue suite, steam curled around marble pillars and gilded mirrors. She sat in the porcelain clawfoot tub, scrubbing her skin with a lavender-scented sponge until it was raw. The water turned a murky grey, washing away years of soot, coal dust, and neglect. Mrs. Pringle, the housekeeper, stood by the door like a sentinel. She was a woman of few words, built like a brick wall in a starched apron. She had watched Genevieve enter with suspicion, but as she saw the bruises on the girl's knees, scars from years of scrubbing floors, her expression had softened, just a fraction. "The water is getting cold, my lady," Mrs. Pringle said. "It is time to dress." "My lady," Genevieve repeated, testing the weight of the words. They felt foreign on her tongue. She stepped out, and the maids wrapped her in thick white towels. For the first time in her life, she saw her full reflection in a mirror, without grime obscuring her face. She was thin, too thin, her collarbones protruding sharply. But her eyes were fierce, and her jaw was set. She looked less like a victim and more like a survivor. The wardrobe Tristan had ordered for her was waiting. It wasn't a collection of frilly pastel gowns like Beatrix wore. These were clothes for a woman of stature, deep velvets in midnight blue, heavy silks in emerald green, and stiff brocades. "The Duke selected the colours himself," Mrs. Pringle noted, holding up a gown of dark sapphire silk. "He said you are not a flower to be displayed, but a storm to be weathered." Genevieve allowed them to lace her into the corset. It was tight, restricting her breath, but it forced her to stand tall. When the gown was fastened, she looked transformed. The dark blue made her pale skin glow like moonlight, and her dark hair, washed and pinned up in an intricate chignon, framed her face with an elegance she didn't know she possessed. "He is waiting in the library," Mrs. Pringle said. "Do not keep him waiting. The Duke values punctuality above godliness." Genevieve walked through the halls of Caldwell Hall. The house was a labyrinth of shadows and expensive art, but she noticed the details others missed. She saw the dust on the top of the portrait frames. The maids were slacking. She saw the slight discoloration on the rug where a vase had likely been broken and replaced. She saw the way the footmen glanced at each other nervously when she passed. This house held secrets, just like Harrington Manor. She entered the library. It was a 2-story room filled with thousands of books. Tristan was standing by a massive oak desk, reviewing a ledger. He didn't look up as the door opened. "You are 3 minutes late," he said. "I was washing off 20 years of dirt, Your Grace," Genevieve replied, her voice steady. "It takes time." Tristan looked up then. He paused. His grey eyes swept over her, taking in the silk dress, the clean hair, the defiant chin. For a second, his mask slipped, revealing a flash of genuine appreciation. "Better?" he said, closing the ledger. "You look like a Caldwell. Now, we must discuss the terms of our arrangement." "Arrangement?" Genevieve asked, stepping closer. "You mean our marriage?" "Marriage is the legal term, but this is a partnership." Tristan walked around the desk, leaning against the edge. "My mother, the Dowager, runs the social calendar of this estate. She also controls the household accounts. For years, money has been leaking. Small amounts. £100 here, 50 there. Enough to drain a fortune over a decade." Genevieve narrowed her eyes. "You think she is stealing from you?" "I think someone is," Tristan said. "My mother is too proud to steal, but she is easily manipulated. I have accountants, lawyers, and advisors. They look at the numbers and see nothing. They see what they expect to see." He crossed his arms. "But you, Genevieve, you were invisible in your own home. You saw things your father tried to hide. You noticed the brandy was watered down. You knew which servants were lying. I saw you catch that wine glass before it fell. You have peripheral vision. You pay attention." "You want me to spy on your mother," Genevieve realized. "I want you to find the leak," Tristan corrected. "The staff will ignore you because they think you are a charity case. My mother will ignore you because she thinks you are beneath her. Use that. Be the invisible sister again. But this time, report to me." "And if I refuse?" Tristan took a step closer, towering over her. The scent of sandalwood and tobacco surrounded her. "If you refuse, you are just a decoration. And I told you I have no use for ornaments. Prove to me that you are worth saving, Genevieve." Genevieve looked at the ledger on his desk. She thought of her father, who had sold her. She thought of Beatrix, who had mocked her. And she thought of the cold, hard reality of the world. Power wasn't given. It was taken. "Show me the books," she said softly. "I learned to do the accounts at Harrington Manor because my father was too drunk to hold a pen. I know how men hide their sins in numbers." Tristan smiled. It was a sharp, dangerous smile. "Good. Dinner is in 10 minutes. The Dowager will try to eat you alive. Do not let her." Dinner at Caldwell Hall was a battlefield disguised as a meal. The dining room was dimly lit by candelabras, the long mahogany table stretching out like a wasteland between the 3 diners. The Dowager Duchess sat at one end, Tristan at the other, and Genevieve sat in the middle, isolated. The first course was a consommé, clear and rich. The only sound was the clinking of silver against china. "So," Lady Catherine began, her voice dripping with disdain, "I understand you have no formal education, Miss Harrington. Can you even read? Or shall we have the menu read aloud to you?" Genevieve carefully lifted her spoon, moving it away from her as etiquette dictated, something she had watched Beatrix practice for hours from the shadows. "I can read, Lady Catherine. I spent a great deal of time in my father's library. It was the only room where I was left alone." "Reading penny dreadfuls, I assume?" Catherine sneered. She turned to Tristan. "Tristan, the Vane family is hosting a gala next week. Lord Archibald Vane asked if you would be attending. He was quite surprised to hear of your sudden engagement. He assumed you would marry someone of breeding." "Archibald Vane is a snake," Tristan said, cutting his meat with precision. and I do not care what he assumes. He brings up a valid point, Catherine pressed. This girl, she is unpolished. She speaks no languages. She plays no instruments. How will she host dignitaries? How will she converse with the French ambassador? Catherine switched seamlessly to fluent, rapid-fire French, looking directly at Geneviève with a cruel smirk. Elle est une honte. Regarde-la. Une petite souris dans la robe d'une reine. Elle ne durera pas une semaine. She is a disgrace. Look at her, a little mouse in a queen's dress. She will not last a week. Tristan's hand tightened on his knife. He was about to speak, to defend her, but Geneviève beat him to it. She placed her spoon down gently. She looked the Dowager Duchess in the eye, her expression calm. Une souris peut survivre là où un lion meurt de faim, madame, Geneviève replied in perfect, élégant French. Et cette robe me va très bien. Ne pensez-vous pas? A mouse can survive where a lion starves, madam. And this dress fits me quite well, don't you think? Silence crashed into the room. The footman in the corner nearly dropped a wine bottle. Lady Catherine's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked as though she had been slapped. Tristan didn't laugh, but his eyes danced with amusement. He raised his glass to Geneviève. Touché. How? Catherine gasped, recovering her composure. How do you know French? My mother was a governess before she married my father, Geneviève lied smoothly. In truth, she had learned by sitting in the ventilation shaft above the schoolroom while Beatrix took expensive lessons, absorbing every word while she darned socks. She believed that a mind is the one thing no one can take from you. Well, Catherine huffed, stabbing a potato. Parrot-like mimicry is hardly culture. But the dynamic had shifted. Geneviève wasn't the victim anymore. Later that night, the real test began. Geneviève lay in the massive four-poster bed in the blue suite, unable to sleep. The house groaned in the wind. She slipped out of bed, put on a silk wrapper, and picked up a candle. She went to the study adjoining the library, the room where the household ledgers were kept. Tristan had given her a key. She opened the heavy book labeled Household Expenses, 1890-1894. She ran her finger down the columns. To the untrained eye, it looked normal. Repairs to the roof, wages for the stable hands, grain for the horses. But Geneviève knew the price of grain. She had bargained with merchants for Harrington Manor's kitchen for years. Oats are listed here at 4 shillings a bushel, she whispered to herself. But in 1892, the price dropped to 2 shillings due to the surplus. She turned the pages. The discrepancy was small, but consistent. Every month, the estate was paying double the market rate for grain, coal, and candlelight wax, and all the invoices came from one supplier, Vane & Sons Trading. Geneviève felt a chill. Lord Archibald Vane, the man the Dowager had mentioned at dinner. The rival. Someone in this house was deliberately funneling Caldwell money to Tristan's greatest enemy. Suddenly, the floorboard creaked behind her. Geneviève spun around, blowing out the candle instantly to hide her position. She pressed herself against the bookshelf, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Who is there?" a voice hissed. It wasn't Tristan. It was a woman's voice, high-pitched and terrified. Geneviève recognized it. It was one of the chambermaids, a girl named Sarah. "I know you're in here," Sarah whispered. "If you're the ghost, take what you want." Geneviève stepped out of the shadows, relighting the candle. The flame illuminated her face from below. "I am not a ghost, Sarah." Sarah shrieked and dropped the silver candlestick she was holding, or rather, stealing. "My lady!" Sarah fell to her knees. "Please, I wasn't. I just—" "You were stealing silver," Geneviève said flatly. She looked at the girl, Sarah was young, shaking, and looked underfed. "Why?" "My brother. He's sick. The doctor costs so much," Sarah sobbed. "Please don't tell the Duke. He'll hang me. He's the Iron Duke." Genevieve looked at the crying maid. Beatrix would have rung the bell and had the girl arrested. Percival would have beaten her. Genevieve knelt down, ignoring the expensive silk of her robe on the dusty floor. "Get up, Sarah." Sarah looked up, eyes wide with terror. "I won't tell the Duke about the silver," Genevieve said quietly. "On one condition. Anything, my lady. Anything." "You see everything in this house," Genevieve said. "You clean the rooms. You empty the wastebaskets. I need eyes, Sarah. I need to know who meets with the suppliers from Vane and Sons. I need to know who leaves the side door unlocked at night." Sarah wiped her nose on her sleeve. "It's Mr. Gable, my lady, the steward. He meets a man in the stables every Tuesday. They exchange envelopes." Genevieve smiled grimly. "Mr. Gable. The man trusted with the accounts." "Put the candlestick back, Sarah," Genevieve said, standing up. "Go back to bed. Tomorrow I will give you money for a doctor. But from this moment on you work for me." Sarah looked at her with awe, then curtsied so low her head touched the floor. "Yes, Your Grace. Thank you, Your Grace." Genevieve watched her leave. She had found the leak, and she had bought her first loyalty. 3 weeks later, the peace of Caldwell Hall was shattered. Tristan and Genevieve were in the morning room. The dynamic between them had settled into a strange, professional rhythm. They weren't lovers. They slept in separate rooms, but they were becoming allies. Genevieve had presented the evidence about Mr. Gable and the inflated grain prices. Tristan had verified it, fired the steward, and saved the estate thousands of pounds in a single afternoon. He had looked at her then with a respect that made her knees weak. "You have a sharp mind, Genevieve," he had said, "sharper than any man I employ." But that morning, the butler entered with a silver tray and a look of doom. "Your Grace," he said. "Visitors." "I'm expecting no one," Tristan said, not looking up from his newspaper. "It is Lord Harrington and Miss Beatrix." Genevieve froze. Her teacup rattled in the saucer. "Let them in," Tristan said slowly, his eyes locking on to Genevieve's pale face. "You do not need to be afraid of them anymore." "I am not afraid," Genevieve lied. The doors opened and Beatrix swept in. If Genevieve looked like a queen in her new clothes, Beatrix looked like a goddess. She wore a travelling suit of pink velvet that hugged her perfect curves. She looked radiant, healthy, and incredibly smug. Percival trailed behind her, looking smugger still. "Genevieve!" Beatrix cried, rushing forward as if they were the closest of sisters. She attempted to embrace her, but Genevieve took a subtle step back. "Sister," Genevieve said coolly. "Father, to what do we owe this pleasure?" "We came to check on you, of course," Percival boomed, reaching for the brandy decanter without asking. "Rumours in town are concerning. People say the Duke has secluded you. They say you are unwell, mentally unstable." "I assure you I am quite sane," Genevieve said. Beatrix turned her dazzling smile on Tristan. "Oh, Your Grace, it must be so difficult for you. Genevieve has always been delicate. She isn't used to polite society. We thought perhaps you needed help preparing her for the engagement ball. I would be happy to stay and assist." "Assist?" Tristan raised an eyebrow. "With her wardrobe, her manners?" Beatrix purred, walking closer to Tristan, invading his personal space. "Genevieve is so plain. It takes a lot of work to make her presentable. I know her best. I know her flaws." It was a blatant attempt to insert herself into the household. Beatrix wanted Tristan. She couldn't believe he had chosen the ugly sister, and she was here to correct the mistake. "We will stay for the week," Percival declared, "leading up to the ball." Genevieve felt the old panic rising. They were going to ruin everything. They would whisper lies to the dowager. They would embarrass her. She looked at Tristan, waiting for him to kick them out. But Tristan didn't kick them out. He leaned back in his chair, a cruel glint in his eye. "By all means, stay. It will be amusing." Genevieve felt a sting of betrayal. Amusing? Was this a game to him? That evening, the torment began. Beatrix took every opportunity to undermine Genevieve. At dinner, she told stories of Genevieve's clumsiness as a child. She laughed about how Genevieve used to talk to rats in the cellar. "She was always so odd," Beatrix giggled, touching Tristan's arm. "We tried to hide her away for her own good." Tristan sat silently, observing. He didn't defend Genevieve. He just watched. Genevieve realized with a jolt that he was testing her again. He wanted to see if she could handle the wolves on her own. If she couldn't handle her sister, she couldn't handle the court of high society. Fine. "Speaking of hiding things," Genevieve said, her voice cutting through Beatrix's laughter. "Father, did you ever pay the milliner for that pink suit Beatrix is wearing? Or is that another debt you're hoping the Duke will cover?" Percival choked on his wine. "How dare you?" "And Beatrix," Genevieve continued, staring at her sister. "You speak of my clumsiness. Do you remember the summer of '92, when the stable boy was fired for stealing your necklace?" Beatrix's smile faltered. "I don't know what you mean." "You gave it to him," Genevieve said calmly. "You were infatuated with him. You gave him the necklace to run away with you. But he took the money and left you behind. You cried for a week and blamed the maid." The table went silent. Beatrix's face turned a violent shade of red. "You little liar." "I saw you," Genevieve said. "I was in the hayloft. I saw everything, including what you let him do to you behind the stables." Beatrix gasped, horrified. In Victorian society, such an accusation, if proven, would ruin her reputation forever. She would be unmarriageable. "That is enough," Tristan said. His voice was calm but final. He looked at Beatrix, who was trembling, and Percival, who was purple with rage. "It seems," Tristan said, taking a sip of wine, "that my betrothed has a better memory than you gave her credit for. I suggest you retire to your rooms, and tomorrow you will treat the future Duchess with the respect she commands, or you will leave on foot." Beatrix fled the room in tears. Percival followed, muttering curses. When they were gone, Tristan turned to Genevieve. "Ruthless," he murmured. "You destroyed her with 3 sentences." "She wanted a war," Genevieve said, her hands shaking slightly under the table. "I gave her one." "Good," Tristan said. He stood up and walked to her chair. He reached down and took her hand, raising it to his lips. He kissed her knuckles, his eyes holding hers. It was the first time he had touched her with anything resembling tenderness. "You are ready for the ball, Genevieve," he whispered against her skin. "They are going to try to break you, but I think you might just break them." For the first time, Genevieve didn't want to pull her hand away. She felt a spark, hot and dangerous, travel up her arm. She wasn't just his partner anymore. She was his equal, but neither of them saw the figure standing in the shadows of the hallway door. The Dowager Duchess had been listening, and she was smiling. "So," the Dowager whispered to herself, "the mouse has teeth. We shall see how sharp they are when the trap snaps shut." The night of the engagement ball arrived, shrouding Caldwell Hall in a veil of deceptive glamour. Outside, a winter storm battered the stone walls, but inside, the great hall was ablaze with the light of 5,000 candles. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, dying flowers and malice. The crème de la crème of English society had gathered, not to celebrate a union, but to witness a spectacle. They had all heard the rumours. The Iron Duke had married a scullery maid. They came to stare, to whisper, and to watch the little mouse be crushed under the weight of a coronet she had no business wearing. Up in the blue suite, Genevieve stood before the mirror. She was not trembling. The fear that had once defined her existence at Harrington Manor had been burned away, replaced by a cold, steely resolve. She wore a gown of deep crimson velvet, the colour of spilled wine and blood. It was a bold choice, bordering on scandalous for a debutante, but Genevieve was no debutante. The neckline was daring, framing the necklace Tristan had clasped around her throat moments ago. The Caldwell fire. A string of rubies that had not been worn in 50 years. "They are waiting for you to fail," Tristan said from the doorway. He looked devastating in his formal evening wear, the sash of his title across his chest, but his face was grim. "My mother has been whispering in Lord Vane's ear all evening. Beatrix is holding court near the orchestra, telling anyone who will listen that you are a kleptomaniac." Genevieve turned to face him. "Let them talk. Words are wind, Tristan. Evidence is stone." "Are you sure you want to do this?" Tristan asked, stepping closer. "We could call it off. I could throw them all out. And leave a shadow over my name forever?" Genevieve shook her head. "No. Tonight, the mouse bites back." He offered her his arm. "Then let us go to war, my love." The moment they appeared at the top of the grand staircase, the music stopped. 300 faces turned upward. The silence was deafening. Genevieve felt the weight of their judgment, heavy and suffocating. She saw the sneer on Beatrix's face, the smug satisfaction on her father's, and the icy glare of the Dowager Duchess. They descended the stairs. Genevieve held her head high, her crimson dress trailing behind her like a royal train. She met the eyes of the women who were whispering behind their fans, and one by one they looked away, unsettled by her intensity. The evening began with a deceptive calm. Genevieve danced the opening waltz with Tristan. She moved with a grace that silenced the critics, her body flowing with his as if they were two halves of the same soul. "You dance well for a servant," Lord Vane sneered as he cut in during the second set. He was a greasy man with eyes that undressed her. "And you dance poorly for a lord," Genevieve replied smoothly, keeping her distance. "But then, I suppose it is hard to keep your balance when your pockets are weighed down with stolen gold." Vane's face went purple. "Careful, girl. You are playing a dangerous game." "The game is over, Lord Vane," she whispered. "You just don't know you've lost yet." The trap was sprung at midnight. The Dowager Duchess, Lady Catherine, signalled for the music to stop. She walked to the centre of the ballroom, tapping her cane on the floor for attention. Beatrix stood by her side, looking like the cat who had finally caught the canary. "My friends," Lady Catherine announced, her voice ringing through the hall. "It is with a heavy heart that I must interrupt this celebration. We have welcomed a new member into this family, a woman of humble origins." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Tristan stood by the fireplace, his face unreadable. He did not move to stop her. "My son, the Duke, has a generous heart," Catherine continued, feigning sadness. "He believed this girl could be saved from her squalor, but you cannot wash the gutter out of the person. Tonight, a tragedy has occurred." She gestured to a pedestal near the back of the room where a glass display case stood empty. "The Caldwell star," Catherine gasped theatrically. "The 50-carat diamond that was to be my gift to the bride. It is gone." Gasps of horror filled the room. "Surely not," Beatrix cried out, stepping forward. "But I saw Genevieve near the case earlier, and everyone knows. Well, at home, we had to lock the silver away. She has a sickness." "A thief!" a woman in the crowd shouted. "Search her!" Percival Harrington yelled, eager to distance himself from his daughter to save his own reputation. "If she took it, she must have it on her." The crowd closed in, a sea of hostile faces. They wanted blood. They wanted to see the crimson dress ripped apart, the maid exposed as a criminal. "Tristan!" the dowager cried. "Do your duty. Search her room or search her person." Tristan walked slowly toward the center of the room. He stopped in front of Genevieve. The crowd held its breath. Would the Iron Duke cast aside his bride? "You accuse the Duchess of Caldwell of theft?" Tristan asked, his voice low and dangerous. "I accuse a common thief of being a thief!" Lord Vane shouted from the sidelines. "Check her purse!" Genevieve stood alone in the circle. She didn't flinch. She slowly unhooked the small velvet purse from her wrist and held it out to Tristan. "Go ahead," she said clearly. Tristan took the purse. He turned it over. Out fell a small, glittering object. The crowd gasped. It was the Caldwell star. "Caught!" Beatrix shrieked, clapping her hands. "I told you! She's a thief!" The dowager looked triumphant. "There is no place for criminals in this house, Tristan. Annul the marriage. Throw her out." Tristan held the diamond up to the light. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he dropped it on the floor and crushed it under the heel of his boot. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the silent hall. "Glass," Tristan said calmly. "A cheap paste replica, worth perhaps 5 shillings. The dowager's face went pale. "What? That is impossible." "Is it?" Genevieve spoke up, her voice cutting through the confusion. She stepped forward, the crimson goddess of vengeance. "You see, Lady Catherine, I knew you and Lord Vane were planning this. I knew you would plant a fake diamond on me to humiliate me, just as I knew you have been funneling money out of the estate accounts for 5 years. "Lies!" Lord Vane roared. Genevieve reached into the bodice of her dress and pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook. "This is not a diary. This is a ledger. The real ledger I found hidden in the floorboards of the steward's room. It details every payment made to Vane and Sons for goods that never arrived. It details the kickbacks paid to you, Lady Catherine, to cover your gambling debts in Monte Carlo." The crowd turned, eyes wide. The scandal shifted instantly. The Dowager Duchess, a gambler, a thief? "And you?" Genevieve turned to Beatrix. "You say I am a thief? Shall we discuss the letter I received this morning? A letter from a jeweller in London, thanking Miss Beatrix Harrington for the sale of a diamond necklace. The very necklace father claimed was stolen by a maid 3 years ago." Beatrix turned white. I never. "The maid was whipped and thrown on the street," Genevieve said, her voice shaking with suppressed rage. "Her life was ruined so you could buy new dresses. You are the thief, Beatrix. You are the rot in our family." Beatrix burst into tears, looking to her father for help, but Percival was already backing away, trying to disappear into the crowd. "Tristan," Lady Catherine sputtered, clutching her chest. "Are you going to let this servant speak to your mother this way?" Tristan stepped up beside Genevieve. He wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her close. The gesture was possessive, protective, and undeniable. "She is not a servant, Mother," Tristan said, his voice thundering through the hall. "She is the Duchess of Caldwell, and she is the only person in this room with a shred of honor. I knew about the trap. I knew about the accounts. Genevieve and I have been watching you for weeks." He turned to the crowd. "Lord Vane, you are trespassing. The authorities are waiting for you at the gate regarding the fraud. Mother, You will retire to the Dower House in Cornwall. You leave tonight. If I see you in London or Yorkshire again, I will cut your allowance to 0. He looked at Beatrix and Percival. And you, get out. If you ever contact my wife again, I will call in your debts, and you will rot in prison. Tristan, please, Percival begged. Go, Tristan roared. The Harringtons fled. Lord Vane was escorted out by footmen. The Dowager Duchess, stripped of her pride, hobbled away, the crowd parting for her like the Red Sea, their whispers now directed at her shame. When they were gone, silence descended on the ballroom again. But this time, it wasn't hostile. It was awe-struck. Tristan turned to Genevieve. He took her hands. They wanted to see a victim, he said softly, loud enough for everyone to hear. Instead, they saw a queen. I told you, Genevieve smiled, tears finally pricking her eyes now that the adrenaline was fading. I am done scrubbing floors. Tristan knelt on one knee. It wasn't a forced proposal this time. It wasn't a business transaction. Genevieve, he said, I bought a contract to save my estate, but somewhere between the arguments and the ledgers, I lost my heart. You are the fire in this cold house. I don't want a partner anymore. I want you. Will you accept me? Not as a duke, but as a man who loves you? Genevieve looked down at him. The Iron Duke, the most feared man in England, on his knees before the rejected sister. I accept, she whispered. Tristan stood and kissed her. It was a kiss of passion, of victory, and of a deep, abiding love that had bloomed in the most unlikely of places. The crowd, swept up in the drama and the undeniable power of the couple, erupted into applause. Outside, the storm raged on, washing away the sins of the past. But inside, Genevieve Harrington, now Genevieve Caldwell, stood in the light, no longer invisible, no longer the pretty one's shadow, but the most powerful woman in England. She had been sold for a debt, but she had purchased her own destiny. And so, the sister who was hidden in the shadows became the diamond that outshined them all. Genevieve didn't just survive, she conquered. She exposed the greed of her father, the vanity of her sister, and the treachery of the elite, proving that true worth isn't found in a pretty face, but in a sharp mind and a brave heart. What do you think? Did Beatrix and the father deserve an even harsher punishment, or was exile enough? And would you have forgiven the family if you were Genevieve? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of justice and romance, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next chapter.